Content warning. This case involves extreme violence and harm to a pregnant woman. Viewer discretion is advised. An unanswered phone call, a mother's worried footsteps approaching her daughter's apartment, and the entire town of Alton, Illinois would soon be shaken by a scene no one could believe. 8 months pregnant, just weeks away from bringing new life into the world, 22-year-old Liese Dodd vanished from her own home. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered something horrifying. She had been murdered and decapitated. If you want to follow the complete investigation of this heartbreaking case and understand how justice was pursued, subscribe to our channel now. We'll walk you through every documented detail from the initial discovery to the final sentencing. On June 9, 2022, is the quiet community of Alton, Illinois, located in the Metro East area near St. Louis, Missouri, a tragedy unfolded that would leave the region in shock. Liese Dodd, a 22-year-old expectant mother approximately 8 months into her pregnancy, was found deceased in her apartment. Her boyfriend, Andreas Holloway, was quickly identified as the primary suspect in what authorities would describe as an exceptionally brutal homicide. According to court documents later cited by local news outlets, Liese's head had been severed from her body and allegedly disposed of in a dumpster near the apartment complex. The investigation would span months, complicated by questions of the defendant's mental fitness to stand trial before ultimately concluding with a 60-year prison sentence. This is the story of what happened based on publicly available court records, news reports, and official statements from law enforcement and prosecutors. Before we delve into the darkness of June 9th, it's essential to remember who Liese Dodd was as a person, not just as a victim of crime. At 22 years old, Liese was embarking on one of life's most profound journeys, motherhood. She was in the final stretch of her pregnancy, expected to give birth in mid to late July 2022. Her family was preparing for a baby shower filled with the excitement and anticipation that comes with welcoming a new member into the fold. Friends and relatives were gathering gifts, planning celebrations, and imagining the future that lay ahead for Liese and her unborn child. Liese was more than the headlines that would later dominate local and national news. She was a daughter, a friend, and soon-to-be mother. Her mother would later speak at the sentencing hearing, describing the profound and permanent impact of losing Liese and her grandchild. In her victim impact statement, she expressed that the family had received what felt like a life sentence of their own. A sentence of grief and loss that no court verdict could alleviate. The community of Alton, a city with deep roots along the Mississippi River, known more for its historical significance and small-town character than for violent crime, would be forever marked by what happened to Liese. Understanding Liese's relationship with Andreas Holloway is crucial to understanding the context, though not the justification for what occurred. According to multiple news reports and court filings, Liese and Holloway had been involved in an on-and-off romantic relationship for approximately 2 years leading up to June 2022. These types of relationships, characterized by cycles of breaking up and reconciling, often carry underlying tensions that can include issues of control, jealousy, financial stress, and in this case, the added pressure of an unexpected or complicated pregnancy. It's important to note that while we can identify patterns common in domestic violence situations, including relationship instability, isolation, and escalating conflict, the specific details of Liese and Holloway's interactions prior to June 9th are not fully detailed in public records. What we do know is that by early June 2022, their relationship status remained unclear, and Liese was nearing the end of her pregnancy. The questions that linger are ones that only those directly involved can answer. Were there warning signs that went unnoticed or unreported? Did friends or family sense danger but felt unsure how to intervene? These are not questions asked to assign blame to anyone other than the perpetrator, but rather to understand how such tragedies might be prevented in the future. Several key phrases would emerge in news coverage and become associated with this case. The unusual silence that worried Liese's family, the welfare check that led to the gruesome discovery, the dumpster where crucial evidence was allegedly found, and the arrest of the suspect approximately 30 miles from the crime scene. Each of these elements played a role in how the investigation unfolded and how quickly authorities were able to identify and apprehend a suspect. June 9th, 2022 began like any other day in Alton, but it would end with a community in mourning and a family shattered beyond repair. The first sign that something was wrong came from the most ordinary of concerns. Liese wasn't answering her phone. In the world of true crime, many cases begin with this simple, everyday worry. A call that goes to voicemail. A text message that remains unread. For Liese's mother, this silence was troubling enough to prompt action. According to reports from local news outlets and police statements, Liese's mother, Heidi Knoll, became increasingly concerned when she couldn't reach her daughter. Given that Liese was in the late stages of pregnancy, any lapse in communication was particularly alarming. Maternal instinct drove her to Liese's apartment to check on her daughter's well-being. What she encountered would haunt her forever. The exact sequence of events at the apartment is not fully detailed in public records, but what is clear is that a welfare check was conducted and authorities were called to the scene. When Alton police officers arrived at Liese's residence, they discovered she had been killed. The Alton Police Department immediately secured the area and launched a homicide investigation. What made this case particularly shocking, even to seasoned law enforcement officials, was the level of violence involved. Chief of Police Jarrett Ford of the Alton Police Department would later make public statements about the severity and brutality of the crime, describing it as one of the most disturbing cases the department had handled. According to court documents that were subsequently cited in news reports, Liese had been decapitated, and her head was allegedly found in a dumpster located near the apartment complex. This detail, while horrifying, became a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. The discovery of Liese's body marked the beginning of an intensive investigation, but it also raised immediate questions. How had the perpetrator acted so quickly? Who had last seen or spoken to Liese alive? And most pressingly, for investigators, who was responsible for this heinous act? The answer to that last question would come relatively quickly, but as we'll see, the path to justice would be anything but swift. When a homicide occurs, especially one as violent as this, investigators must work systematically to build a timeline, identify suspects, and gather evidence. While many of the specific investigative techniques used by the Alton Police Department have not been publicly disclosed, standard procedure in such cases typically involves several key steps establishing a timeline of the victim's last known movements and communications. Identifying anyone who had recent contact with the victim, collecting physical evidence from the crime scene, reviewing surveillance footage from the area, analyzing cell phone data and location information, and interviewing witnesses and potential suspects. In the case of Liese Dodd, several factors likely helped investigators narrow their focus quickly. First, as is unfortunately common in cases involving the murder of women, intimate partners and ex-partners are often among the first individuals investigated simply because statistics show that women are most likely to be killed by someone they know intimately. Second, the nature of the crime suggested a level of rage and personal involvement that pointed toward someone with a close connection to the victim. Third, and perhaps most importantly, there may have been physical evidence, witness statements, or digital data that linked Deandrea Holloway to the scene or to Liese's last known hours. What is publicly known is that Deandrea Holloway was identified as a suspect relatively early in the investigation. News reports consistently identified him as Liese's on-again, off-again boyfriend, establishing the personal connection that would prove central to the case. The Alton Police Department, with assistance from other law enforcement agencies in the region, worked to locate and apprehend Holloway. On-screen graphics accompanying news reports at the time differentiated between what was publicly known and what remained under investigation. The public knew that a pregnant woman had been murdered in her home, that the crime involved decapitation, that a suspect had been identified, and that an arrest was imminent. What was not public included many of the forensic details. The precise timeline of events on June 9th, the contents of any communications between Liese and Holloway in the days leading up to her death, and the specific evidence that led investigators to focus on Holloway as their primary suspect. Within days of Liese's body being discovered, law enforcement located and arrested Deandrea Holloway. According to news reports, he was apprehended in Gillespie, Illinois, a small city in Macoupin County, located approximately 30 miles northeast of Alton. The arrest represented a crucial step in the case, taking a dangerous individual off the streets and allowing the community to breathe a small sigh of relief. However, as any experienced observer of the criminal justice system knows, an arrest is merely the beginning of a long legal process. The journey from the crime scene in Alton to the arrest location in Gillespie might have involved the suspect fleeing the area, attempting to evade capture, or simply being at another location when investigators tracked him down. News coverage at the time showed stock footage of police vehicles flashing lights and maps, tracing the route between the two cities, building tension around the manhunt and eventual apprehension. For Liese's family and the Alton community, Holloway's arrest provided some measure of comfort, but it could not bring Liese back or undo the trauma that had been inflicted. As the case moved from the investigative phase to the prosecutorial phase, attention turned to what charges would be filed and how the legal system would handle a crime of this magnitude. The severity of what happened to Liese Dodd meant that this would be treated as a capital case, though Illinois abolished the death penalty in 2011, meaning the maximum sentence would be life imprisonment or a very lengthy prison term. According to news reports from 2022, DeAndrea Holloway faced multiple serious charges. These included first-degree murder, intentional homicide of an unborn child, dismemberment of a human body, and concealment of a homicidal death. Each of these charges carried significant prison time, and taken together, they reflected the compound nature of the tragedy, not one life lost, but two. Illinois law, like the laws of many states, has specific statutes addressing the killing of an unborn child. These laws recognize that when a pregnant woman is murdered, two victims exist: the mother and the unborn baby she carried. In this case, Liese was approximately 8 months pregnant, meaning her child was viable and could have survived outside the womb with medical support. The charge of intentional homicide of an unborn child acknowledged this reality and ensured that the legal system accounted for both lives lost. The charge of dismemberment of a human body addressed the specific brutality of how Liese was killed and what was done to her body afterward. This charge is typically reserved for cases where a perpetrator attempts to conceal a crime, dispose of a body, or inflict additional desecration upon a victim. Similarly, the charge of concealment of a homicidal death related to the alleged disposal of Liese's head in a dumpster, an act designed to hide evidence and make identification or investigation more difficult. Understanding these charges helps explain why this case garnered such significant media attention and why the eventual sentence would be so severe. This was not a crime of passion in the traditional sense, nor was it an accident or a death that occurred during another crime. It was, according to the charges, an intentional, brutal, and calculated act of violence against a vulnerable woman and her unborn child. One aspect of this case that prolonged the legal process significantly was the question of DeAndrea Holloway's mental fitness to stand trial. In the American legal system, a defendant must be competent to participate in their own defense. This means they must understand the nature of the charges against them, comprehend the potential consequences, and be able to assist their attorney in preparing a defense. If a defendant is found to lack this competency, they cannot be tried until their mental state improves to the point where they meet the legal standard. According to news reports covering the case in 2023 and 2024, there were delays in the proceedings due to questions about Holloway's fitness to stand trial. He underwent mental health evaluations, and the court had to determine whether he was competent to proceed. These evaluations and determinations are not quick processes. They involve psychiatric assessments, legal hearings, and sometimes treatment to restore competency if possible. It's crucial to understand that fitness to stand trial is not the same as an insanity defense. An insanity defense addresses whether the defendant knew right from wrong at the time of the crime. Fitness to stand trial addresses whether the defendant can participate in the legal process now. A person can be found fit to stand trial but still mount an insanity defense, or vice versa. The delays in this case were related to Holloway's current mental state, not to claims about his mental state at the time of Liese's murder. For Liese's family, these delays were undoubtedly agonizing. Each postponement, each evaluation, each legal hearing meant more time living in limbo, unable to fully grieve because the case remained unresolved. The wheels of justice, while designed to protect the rights of all parties, can grind slowly, especially when mental health issues complicate matters. Eventually, however, Holloway was deemed fit to stand trial, and the case moved forward. After months of delays, legal maneuvering, and mental health evaluations, the case took a significant turn. Rather than proceeding to a full jury trial, where witnesses would testify, evidence would be presented in detail, and a jury would deliberate on guilt or innocence, DeAndrea Holloway chose to accept a plea deal. According to news reports from late 2024, Holloway pleaded guilty to 3 of the most serious charges: first-degree murder, intentional homicide of an unborn child, and concealment of a homicidal death. By pleading guilty, Holloway admitted to the crimes without requiring the prosecution to prove its case at trial. This decision likely came after negotiations between his defense attorneys and the Madison County State's Attorney's Office. Plea deals are common in the American criminal justice system and serve multiple purposes. They provide certainty of conviction and punishment, spare victims' families the trauma of a trial, conserve court resources, and sometimes result in a more lenient sentence than might be imposed after a jury conviction. In this case, the agreed-upon sentence was 60 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. According to various news sources, this sentence was structured as 30 years for the first-degree murder charge, 20 years for the intentional homicide of an unborn child charge, and 10 years for the concealment charge, all to be served consecutively. This means Holloway would serve each sentence one after another, rather than simultaneously ensuring he would spend decades behind bars. Under Illinois law, individuals convicted of first-degree murder must serve 100% of their sentence without the possibility of parole or early release. This means that unless the sentence is overturned on appeal or commuted by executive action, Holloway will remain in prison for the full 60 years. At the time of sentencing, he was in his late 20s, meaning he would be in his 80s before even being considered for release, effectively a life sentence. The acceptance of the plea deal and the announcement of the 60-year sentence brought a measure of closure to the legal proceedings, but as Madison County State's Attorney Tom Hain noted in public statements, no sentence could ever truly bring closure to a family that has lost a loved one in such a horrific way. Hain expressed hope that the resolution of the case would allow Liese's family to begin the long process of healing and moving forward with their lives, even as they carried the permanent scar of her loss. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for Liese's family to address the court and the defendant directly through victim impact statements. These statements are a crucial part of the criminal justice process, allowing those most affected by a crime to have their voices heard and to convey the full scope of the harm that has been done. According to news coverage from First Alert 4 and other local media outlets, Liese's mother, Heidi Noel, delivered a powerful and heartbreaking statement. In her remarks, Heidi described the devastating impact of losing both her daughter and her unborn grandchild. She spoke about the life sentence her family now served, not one imposed by a judge, but one created by grief trauma and the permanent absence of Liese from their lives. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone that Liese should have been present for would now be marked by her absence. The baby she carried, who should have celebrated their second birthday by now, never took a first breath. The courtroom, by most accounts, was filled with emotion as Heidi spoke. Family members, friends, law enforcement officers who had worked the case, and even court staff were reportedly moved by her words. This is the human reality behind every crime statistic, every news headline, every legal proceeding. Behind the facts and figures are real people whose lives have been irrevocably altered by violence and loss. No amount of prison time for DeAndrea Holloway could restore what was taken. No legal proceeding could bring Liese back or give her child the chance to live. The 60-year sentence represented society's judgment on the severity of Holloway's crimes and its commitment to holding him accountable, but it could not undo the harm. For Heidi Noel and the rest of Liese's family, the sentencing marked the end of one chapter of their nightmare, the legal uncertainty and wait for justice, but the beginning of another learning to live with permanent loss. The case of Liese Dodd reverberated far beyond the courtroom and far beyond Alton, Illinois. In the Metro East region near St. Louis, the community was shaken by the brutality of what had occurred in their midst. Alton, a city of about 27,000 people, is not immune to crime. But a crime of this nature involving a pregnant woman killed in her own home struck a particularly painful chord. Vigils were held, memorial funds were established, and conversations began about how such tragedies might be prevented. The case also received national media attention. Outlets across the country picked up the story, drawn by the shocking nature of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim. True crime podcasts, television shows, and online forums discussed the case, often focusing on the same questions that haunted those closest to Liese. Could this have been prevented? Were there warning signs that were missed or ignored? What can society do to better protect women, especially pregnant women, from intimate partner violence? These are not easy questions, and they don't have simple answers. Research consistently shows that pregnancy can be a particularly dangerous time for women in abusive relationships. Some abusers escalate violence when they feel their control is threatened, and a pregnancy can represent such a threat, whether because of the attention and resources directed toward the baby, the woman's increased vulnerability, or fears about financial obligations. Organizations dedicated to preventing domestic violence emphasize the importance of screening pregnant women for abuse, providing resources and support, and taking threats seriously. For those who knew Liese, the question of "what if" likely haunts them. What if someone had recognized the relationship as dangerous earlier? What if Liese had felt safe reaching out for help? What if there had been intervention before June 9th? These questions are not meant to place blame on anyone other than the perpetrator, but they reflect the painful reality that intimate partner violence often follows warning signs that in hindsight seem clear, but in the moment may be ambiguous or dismissed. As we reflect on this tragic case, several lessons emerge that are worth considering, not as judgments on those involved, but as guidance for society moving forward. Domestic violence, particularly in intimate relationships, rarely appears suddenly in its most extreme form. It typically escalates over time with patterns of control, jealousy, isolation, and increasingly serious acts of aggression. Recognizing these patterns early, whether in our own relationships or those of people we care about, is crucial. Communities need accessible, well-funded resources for people experiencing domestic violence. This includes shelters, hotlines, legal assistance, and counseling services that are available 24 hours a day and don't require victims to jump through bureaucratic hoops to access help. It also includes education and awareness campaigns that help people understand what constitutes abuse and where to turn for help. The legal system must take threats and violence seriously, particularly when the victim is in a vulnerable state, such as pregnancy, and must prioritize victim safety over other considerations. The story of Liese Dodd is one of promise cut short of a young woman about to embark on motherhood who never got that chance, and of a community forced to confront the darkest aspects of human behavior. It is also a story about the pursuit of justice, however imperfect that justice may be. The legal system convicted and sentenced DeAndrea Holloway, holding him accountable for his actions and ensuring he cannot harm anyone else for the foreseeable future. But justice for Liese and her unborn child is incomplete because no verdict can restore what was lost. Thank you for watching this detailed examination of the Liese Dodd case. If you appreciate thorough, fact-based coverage of true crime cases that respects victims and their families, while seeking to understand how tragedy occurs and how justice is pursued, please subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this case, or on how society can better protect vulnerable individuals from intimate partner violence. What reforms or resources do you think are most needed? Your engagement helps us continue producing content that treats these serious topics with the gravity and respect they deserve. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233 or by texting START to 88788. You deserve safety support and freedom from abuse. Reaching out is not a sign of weakness, but an act of courage that could save your life or the life of someone you love.